Do you like have any favorite podcasts, or do you listen to any podcasts?
No, I listen to a lot of audiobooks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you like to read books about?
Wide range of stuff. I really liked Will Smith's book.
Okay, that was good.
It was really good, really good.
Did you read Jada's book?
I did not.
No. Okay, I read both of them.
How's Jada's book? I got my feelings about her.
I am a Jada fan. Been a
Okay.
Jada fan way back since I was a little girl. So I think I'm biased, but I've always been, fascinated by her journey. I thought both of them had very good books.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm biased, but
Okay.
I know people tired of hearing about the Smiths, so
Yeah.
so we won't talk about them on the show. But yeah, so you like reading like biographies or?
I run the gambit. I like biographies. Next on my list, I'm going to read about a book about Nelson Mandela.
Okay.
I also read science fiction.
Okay.
I'm listening to an audiobook right now. It's completely fiction, but it's about this amusement park that gets shut down because of a hurricane and people get trapped inside. It's really interesting.
Okay.
Sometimes I just need stuff to take my mind off of work,
Yeah.
because I deal with a lot of murders, a lot of shootings, a lot of sadness.
Yeah.
So sometimes I just need to go sci-fi and watch cartoons and kind of zone out.
Yeah, like a different kind of world than the one that we're living in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What else do you do to kind of decompress?
I work out a lot.
Yeah.
I used to run, but my knee has been giving me problems, so I took that about a year off of running. I may get back into it.
Yeah.
I've run ultra marathons.
Okay.
That's good. I've been a triathlete, so swim, bike, run, which has been really good. So I like to get out there, and I'm a scuba diver as well. So I love scuba diving. That's
scary.
my passion. I love scuba diving. Yes.
Wow.
When I retire, I'm going to go to a coast and just scuba dive every day.
What's the most interesting thing you've ever seen when you were scuba diving?
Probably a shark. I've swam with sharks. I've scuba dived with sharks.
That's crazy.
And stingray, probably about this big.
Okay.
I've seen.
Wow.
It's crazy. It's an entirely different world down there. It is an entirely different world. It's
I
amazing.
mean, I've always just imagined that, but I can't swim, so I only go like so far. But yeah, I mean, I'm of course like everyone else concerned about our oceans and the wildlife and things like that. And I'm sure like as a person that's a scuba diver, it's like the same type of thing. We want to see, this preserved for the next generations. But before we get too deep, before I ask too many questions about when you learn how to swim and all that stuff, I want to introduce you. We have attorney Anthony Pierson on our show, who is running for prosecutor in Franklin County. So we have a very special guest on.
Thank you for having me.
You have over 22 years of experience?
I graduated law school in 2002.
Okay.
I did some corporate law work, realized I didn't like it, but started prosecuting misdemeanors in 2003.
Okay. What did you not like about corporate law?
Well, the money was great, so I liked that.
Sure.
But it was just the fact that I didn't feel like I was making an impact. I felt like I was doing something that any other lawyer really could do. And it just did not interest me. I didn't feel like I went to law school to sit in an office for 8-9 hours a day, not really interact with people, not really talk to people, do some corporate research, write a short paper about it, essentially a short memo about it, and send it to a partner. It just wasn't fulfilling for me.
Okay, I understand that. So when you think about impact, like I've gone to a couple of the forums that you've done. Okay. And I know, you're from Dayton?
I'm originally from Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. Right. Yes, you're from Indianapolis. And you talked a little bit about how you decided that you wanted to become an attorney. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about that journey. So
Okay.
you grew up in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I grew up in Indianapolis.
Specifically?
Yes, I grew up in Indianapolis, the north side.
Okay.
And when I was young, I was about 10 years old, and this was really my first brush with crime and criminals. I grew up in a middle-class household. My parents were pretty well off. My dad worked at the local power and light company, and my mother was a beautician, and she owned her own beauty shop with some other women. And one day she came home. I heard the garage door open. It was normal. And she comes home, and I look at her, wondering about what's for dinner, and I can see she's crying, and she doesn't say hi to me. She goes straight to my father. And they're in the other room, and I can hear them talking about how she had gotten off work. She had driven to the gas station, and a guy put a gun in her face and yanked her purse from her and ran off with it. And my father was mad. He was an athletic guy. He was like the strongest, toughest guy I knew, but I could see the frustration and anger on his face that he couldn't like get a hold of that guy.
Right.
And it really hurt my mom. It hurt my dad. Fortunately, she was not physically hurt, but she was just rattled from all of that.
Yeah.
And I remember driving back there to the gas station and like looking for her purse, see if we could find her checkbook or her wallet or things like that. And we couldn't find anything. But I was kind of scared and I was kind of angry, and I just I was like, how could someone do this to someone else? And not only just do this to my mom, but also not get in trouble for it. Because, growing up and being 10, I always thought that you do something bad, you get in trouble for it.
Right. There's a consequence.
Exactly. And I'm looking at this guy and wondering why he wasn't held responsible. So from that kind of led me down the journey of, I want to make sure people are held responsible. I didn't know if I was going to go into like the FBI or do something else, but that was really the first seed that got planted in my head about how I felt like I should do something to hold people responsible for the things that they do, the bad things they do.
So you've always then wanted to, you kind of were starting to explore that arena. When were you was it college when you were like, okay, I'm definitely going to become an attorney? And where did you go to college?
I went to college at Ball State University, which is in northern Indiana. Go Cards. So I originally started with a criminal justice degree. That was my major. But I took an economics class from a professor, and I really liked how he taught. I liked the information that he was conveying, and I thought it was great. So I switched my major to economics and graduated with an economics degree. But we had it was an advanced econ course. I can't remember what it was called. Maybe I can't remember what it was called, but we had a debate on the death penalty. And so it was a small class. There was like 8 of us, and we split up into groups, and we had a debate session where one group would argue for the death penalty, the other group would argue against the death penalty. And we did that, and I really liked it. It was kind of like courtroom-esque, And I was like, wow, this is really fun. And after the class, he said, I know you're getting your degree in economics. And this was a professor that I really admired and looked up to. He was kind of my mentor. He said, I know you are going to get a degree in economics, but you should go to law school. You shouldn't go, because I was thinking about going to get an advanced degree in economics. And he said, you shouldn't do that. It's just math. You're a great speaker. You're a good writer. This is really what you should do. And I followed his advice and applied to law schools. Okay. And I got accepted into a fair amount, but I wanted to go to Ohio State. So I came here and went to the Ohio State University College of Law. Okay.
So that's what brought you to Ohio.
Right.
And you've been here ever since.
Okay. Yeah. I remember coming here must have been 1999. I had never visited Ohio. I didn't have family here or anything like that. I had already accepted to go to Ohio State to law school, and I had never visited before. And it was funny because the first time I visited was I was looking for an apartment to live. Okay. And I've been here ever since. Okay. I just fell in love with the town. It was Indianapolis and Indiana is kind of like a cow town.
Yeah.
And so I felt Columbus was a lot more progressive ideas and things like that. So I kind of latched on.
People call Columbus a cow. Well, not anymore, but at the time, called Columbus and Ohio an entire just like corn.
Yes.
Corn. Yeah.
So, but compared to Indianapolis.
Exciting. Yeah. But I like Indianapolis, though. I've only been a few times, but it's like one of those places, I think, if you want to go on a short trip.
Short trip.
Short
trip.
It's like, it's in driving distance.
Yes,
I had a friend that went to med school there, so I've been there a few times. So it sounds like you found your home in Columbus.
I did.
And this is where you started. You referenced your corporate law career and then transitioned into becoming a more of a public servant.
Yes, I graduated law school, and like a lot of my friends, they went where the money was. We had a lot of student loans, so it was thoughts of what are we going to do, who's making the most money, who's going to the big firm. And so I got an offer from a big firm, and I wanted to give it a shot. Yeah. And so I did.
Okay.
And it was okay, and I admire the people who do it, but it just wasn't for me.
Yeah. So what have you liked about sort of being more in the public sphere versus the corporate?
I feel like I'm helping people. I know that I'm helping people. Being a prosecutor, and it's not really just being in the public space. It's really about being a prosecutor. That's just where my passion is. It's the idea that I'm helping people who are often dealing with the worst day of their life.
Yeah.
Right now, I deal with a lot of murder cases, a lot of families who have lost a loved one, and I get to help them through that process. And I get to use kind of my specific skill set of talking and communicating with them. Getting them to understand the court process, the challenges that we have, and hopefully we can hold the person responsible who committed this horrible act upon them or their family.
Yeah. So it sounds like you, in your roles, do you interact a lot with families like one-on-one, or is it more like you have liaisons, or kind of how does that work? We do have victim witness assistants who help us with maybe a lot of the day-to-day things like, hey, a court date got continued. Can you contact the family and let them know and send them a letter and things like that? But I make sure all of the families I work with have my office number so they can call me if they have questions or if they're feeling nervous or if they've heard something on the news or in the media that's like makes them feel uneasy, that they can call me. Okay. And I make sure that I'm accessible because I think it's important. And So I do interact with them regularly and work with them as that really very stressful process takes place of taking someone to trial or handling the defendant's case. Yeah. I want to roll it back a little bit because part of what we do on our show is it's not just a show where I have people on and they come talk to me about whatever office that they're in or office that they're running for, but it's really like an educational tool. So I want you to tell people what your job is. Like, what do you do as a prosecutor? And how is that different from being like the big person that you're running to be, the county prosecutor?
Great question.
So can you answer that question for me?
Absolutely. And I will try and give you a short version because I could talk about this for hours. But so my current role right now is I'm deputy chief counsel. Okay. So the juvenile division and the grand jury division of the prosecutor's office report to me. I'm also involved in some other items that I have really taken on myself because I feel that they're important in the office, such as training. I've taken on that role of training a lot of our newer prosecutors because due to the fact that there was a shift when Mr. Tareya took office between it was a Republican and Mr. O'Brien. Mr. Tareya took office, he's a Democrat. There was a fair amount of people who left the office, just natural transition. Okay. And then COVID happened. So court was closed for, a year and a half. It was a long time where very few, if any, trials were happening. So we had a lot of newer prosecutors who had not had the criminal trials. So one of the things that I started when I started back when I came back to the office in May of 2023 was I implemented a training program to train prosecutors on how to essentially try a case, from picking a jury to opening statements to witness examination, cross-examination, all the way through the trial process, because that's important. And I think they were missing that due to the fact that they did not have a lot of trials.
Right.
So I've really rolled up my sleeves and gotten heavily involved in minority recruitment and attorney retention, because I think that's really important for our office. I think our office should reflect the community. I think any law enforcement office should reflect the community that it's serving.
What do those numbers look like right now in terms of reflection of the community?
I would have to think. It's not anywhere close to where it should be. Okay. I can certainly tell you that. Mm-hmm. But it's hard.
Yeah.
Because if you have a smart Black attorney, they can really write their own ticket to wherever they want to go. Okay. And that's what I tell the undergrads, when I'm talking to them, go, become an attorney, because you can do a lot of things. And so we're trying to recruit for a very small pool with the city attorney's office, the United States attorney's office, the judges who need law clerks and who need staff attorneys, the public defender's office, the Ohio State State of Ohio Public Defender's Office. So there's a lot of pools trying to go after these young, bright minds, and we're just one of those entities.
Yeah. Do you have sort of like plans, if you are elected to become Franklin County prosecutor, how you would work to recruit more students? Have you thought about, HBCUs as a particular avenue? Kind of walk me through what you're thinking for that.
Absolutely. I have actually started making more inroads than what was in place before I got there. We are involved in the minority clerkship program, which is through the Columbus Bar Association. It is a program to get minorities in law school placed with law firms and public sector legal jobs, because for instance, myself, I didn't have any attorneys in my family. I couldn't call like the family friend attorney and get me exposed to the legal career. I didn't have that.
Yeah.
So I went through the minority clerkship program that got me exposed to the legal career, the legal careers that are available. So our office is involved in that. I have talked to undergrads, and I have gone to Ohio State Law School, talking to the Black Law Students Association, essentially trying to recruit them and making myself available for questions, for mentorship and things like that. And so I'll make sure I continue to do that.
And when you're going to talk to these students, what do you hear from them? What are they saying? Are they saying, I want to come work in the prosecutor's office? Or are they like... y'all don't pay enough? Like, what are they? What is this generation saying about coming into an office like yours? And also, sort of, what are their concerns about the role?
I think one of the things that really stuck with me after talking to various groups is that they're concerned that the system is not fair for Blacks and other minority groups, and so their first reaction is to kind of, I don't want to be a part of that. I'll go somewhere and do something else. Okay. And my reaction to that is, no, whoa, wait a minute. That's why we need you. That's why we need you to change the system from the inside, because it's a lot easier. It can be you can be a lot more effective if you come inside and change the system from within. And that seems to have resonated. And also I tell them a lot of the cool prosecution stories that have happened as being a prosecutor. It's a lot more interesting than any corporate job that they could get.
Yeah. When I always feel a bit of pause when I hear the phrase of like changing the system from the inside.
Okay. Yeah, tell me about that.
Well, because I feel like systems are very much like roots of a tree. If you just kick a tree, kick the trunk, it's not going to do anything. You have to really wrestle with that thing to get it out and to get whatever is happening in there to be changed. And so I think that I'm always I know how much work it takes to change a system and how many levers need to be pulled in order for that to happen. And that's why, there are so many, I think, systemic issues right now. We know the justice system has, or as some people say, the injustice system has a lot of issues in terms of how people of color, Black folks specifically, are treated within it. So do you have anything specifically like systemic that you feel needs to be changed, and what would be your power as prosecutor to start to make some of those changes?
Yeah. There are a lot of things.
That was a big question, but
it was. I wanted to start with a story. One of this happened to me, and I may have told this at a forum. I don't know. Apologize if I'm repeating myself, but this situation stuck with me, and it reminded me the importance of staying within the system. So when I was a young prosecutor in the juvenile division, I was in a gang unit. So I prosecuted a lot of the young gang members out there. And there was another prosecutor who was a colleague of mine. He was not in the gang unit. But I don't know if he wanted to be cool with me or show how cool or smart he was, or I'm not sure. But there was one day he was getting ready for trial, and he was talking about really how he has this gang kid that he is prosecuting. And I'm kind of barely listening to the story. And I go, well, how do you know he's in a gang? Because if he's I'm thinking to myself, because if it's a gang kid, it should probably be assigned to me, and it was mistakenly assigned to you. And he said, because when he committed this crime, he was wearing red. And I was like, that's it? And he was like, yeah. And it's like, I told him, hey, just because it's a Black kid and he's wearing red doesn't mean that he's a blood. It doesn't mean that he is a gang. He's affiliated with a gang. Don't you realize we live in Columbus and Ohio State is here, and every, 1 out of 4 persons is wearing red. Doesn't mean that they're in a gang. And I had to break it down to him like that. And I left that day thinking, wow, some of these prosecutors really think that just because someone's wearing red that they're in a gang. Just because you're a Black kid wearing red, you're in a gang.
So you're seen as like monolith versus as an individual.
Exactly. Yeah.
And
so I took that like, I need to stay here, because if I'm not here, if I would not have had that conversation with him, he could go his entire career thinking that.
Yeah.
So I want to work on things, and I have a 5-point plan that's on my website, PearsonForProsecutor.com.
Yeah. Can you talk to us about your 5-point plan?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I want to make sure we do is develop guidelines for sentencing and guidelines for plea offers. Because right now, if a person commits a crime, let's say someone commits a crime, and it gets assigned to me, I may look at the case and say, that person I should offer them X for a plea offer. Maybe it's 3 years in prison for whatever reason. I'm going to offer him that if he pleads guilty to this crime, he should do 3 years in prison. Well, if it gets assigned to person B, my colleague, who may be right next door to me in the office, they could look at the same case, the same fact pattern, and go, this person should get 10 years in prison. I'm going to offer him a 10-year plea. And I don't think that's necessarily right, because as you know, if there aren't enough guidelines and checks and balances, implicit bias could creep in.
Right.
And so we could look at a white individual and give a more lenient plea offer than we do for a Black individual with the same facts. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think I work with any prosecutors who are intentionally doing that or anything like that. They may not be doing that. But we need to put in those guidelines to ensure that it does not happen. And that's one of the things that I want to put in place.
So I just want to stop you to make sure I'm understanding. So you're telling me right now there are no sentencing guidelines, like there's no rubric that you all look toward, like this person did this thing and then they did this and then they did that.
No.
And this is
so
that is a problem.
I think it's a problem.
It's a huge problem.
It is.
Are there
sorry to cut you off, but I think
no, go ahead.
I think most prosecutors will look at certain things such as prior record, severity of the offense.
Okay.
injury to victim, things like that they have been taught over the years. But there's no rubric for it. So how much is harm to a victim? How much should that move the scale? Should it move a prison offense to a probation offense, or should it move a 10-year offense to a 9-year offense? I mean, we should really put some sort of checks and balances on that, so it's not such a full range.
So are there best practices of guidelines, sentencing guidelines in other places in the country that are similar to cities like Columbus?
I have not seen any.
Okay.
And I've gone to trainings all across the country.
Okay.
And I haven't talked about this specifically at all of the trainings, but
right.
I not that I am aware of.
Okay.
And so this would certainly be something that's not generally found.
Okay.
With respect to sentencing guidelines, the federal system does have sentencing guidelines, but I would like to implement the same thing, meaning that when we make a recommendation to the court for sentencing an individual who has either been found guilty or pled guilty to a crime, there's no rubric to say that what they did, we should be arguing for whatever prison sentence we decide to argue.
Okay. Let me play devil's advocate here for you. A little bit. So say you come with the sentencing guidelines as the head prosecutor for the county. Who then can come and say, no, we don't want that? Is there legislation that can be put into play? Like how can you be fought on actually implementing those sentencing guidelines? What sort of pushback would you possibly get for that you could anticipate? Mm-hmm. Because I think if it were easy, somebody would have did it by now.
Oh, yes. It is not easy. Mm-hmm. Because people will say that there are no two crimes that are the same. So if I rob you, it may have a completely different impact than if I rob her. Mm-hmm. So people will, I think that will be a huge pushback. Mm-hmm. Additionally, there's a lot of moving parts there. Because, you have strength of a case, whether I can prove it or not, whether the victim's cooperative. I mean, there's a lot of things that are in place. However, in the federal system, there are sentencing guidelines that the federal system uses. It's really complicated. So it's big. It's a lot of work. But I think it's important.
So when I think about federal sentencing guidelines, the first thing I think about is sentencing guidelines around drugs.
Okay. Yeah.
And how even though there are sentencing guidelines, they have actually, to me, and I think this is not anecdotal. I mean, there's data to back this up. Giving somebody an immediate life sentence for doing something. Like I'm thinking about the ways that this could be great, but also the ways that it could possibly backfire. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you also considered those things?
Yes, I have. We are still, if I commit, for whatever level of offense that a person commits, there's a maximum of what they can get. Mm-hmm. So, and sometimes prosecutors argue for the maximum. Sometimes the judges give the maximum.
Yeah.
But there should still be guidelines, I think, from our office to make a recommendation. And again, from the prosecutor, we don't mandate the sentence. It is only a recommendation to the court. And it's up to the court to follow it. The court could look at me and I could say, Judge, our office has guidelines, and according to the guidelines, I feel that so-and-so should get 15 years. The judge could say, I don't care about your silly guidelines. I'm giving them 20 years. I'm giving them 5. Mm-hmm. It's up to the judge, but it's just our recommendation so that we are more consistent within our ranks. Mm-hmm. And I think that's important, that we are more consistent within our own ranks.
Thanks for walking me through that. I'm also interested to hear what are your other, you said you have 5.
Yes.
I only let you get through one, so I'm going to let you go through the other
So
4.
It's to the plea offer guidelines and the sentencing guidelines. I also want to make diversion easier. Not necessarily to open the floodgates so anyone who commits a shooting or a robbery can get diversion, but
what is diversion for the listeners who don't know what that means?
Great. Sorry,
That's
kind
okay.
of get ahead of myself too much.
No, you're all right.
Diversion is a program through the county prosecutor's office where if someone commits a crime, if it is of a certain level, they can complete this program and not have that conviction go on their record, essentially. So it is, so let's say it's a low-level drug offense. You don't have a prior record. You could go through the diversion program. You have to go to a different office. So you show up to court, then you have to go to a different office, get screened for it to make sure you meet all the criteria. Your case that you have, the judge does not accept a guilty plea yet, holds it aside. And if you complete all the requirements, it may be community service, it may be going to drug treatment, paying a fine back, staying out of trouble for 6 months. And then after you have completed all that successfully, your case gets dismissed. Sometimes people fall through the cracks because maybe they don't make it to the meeting that they screen because they have childcare issues or they miss the bus or something like that. I want to work with those issues that people have and make sure that we don't let people fall through the cracks for those silly reasons. Now, if you're going to go out and commit a robbery, you're not going to qualify for diversion. You're going to get kicked out of the program and prosecuted. But again, if it's for one of those reasons that aren't necessarily egregious, then I want to make sure that we can still help those people.
Okay.
So now we're up to 3.
Yes.
Plea offers, sentencing recommendations, and diversion. Minority recruitment, which we've talked about. I want to make sure we continue that and expand those efforts. I think it's very, very important, again, based on my experience. And different people have different experiences throughout their life. They come into contact with different things, different crimes, different familial relationships. So I think that's important to have that sort of diversity within the office. Because even though I'm Black, I still don't have all of the diverse experiences that people have.
Right.
And then the 5th item is transparency. For every officer-involved shooting that we have, I think it's very important to put that file online for the public to see, for the public to view, for the public to go in, minus the necessary redactions, of course, but for the public to go in and see exactly what happened there, to watch the videos that are available, to listen to the interviews. I think that's very important that we have that transparency, because right now there's a lot of mistrust with law enforcement officers, with the law enforcement and criminal justice process in our community. Absolutely.
And you're coming out of Gary Tyek's office. You work for Tyek. I'm a little... So today, we know that we're a couple days out from the mistrial, Jason Meade's case, for the shooting of Casey Goodson Jr. And I feel, and I think a lot of people in the community feel, that the case has taken a long time they've gone through the case now, it's a mistrial, but before that it took 3 years for that family to be able to sit across from Jason Meade and see some sort of possibility for accountability. So if you were elected, first of all, kind of talk me, I think we should talk to people through kind of what happens for something to take this long. And then also, if you were elected, is there anything that you would do differently?
Okay, so I'm trying to figure out what question I should take first. I'm currently prosecuting a police officer. I'm currently prosecuting Adam Coy. And that case happened the same month as when Casey Goodson was killed. And my case, or not my case, but the case I'm handling against Adam Coy is still not set for trial until October. So I don't know if you've seen the news stories or the write-ups. I've been objecting at every step of the way. And I still can't get a trial date, but hopefully we have that trial date in October. But when an officer-involved shooting happens, there's a lot of video that needs to be given to the other side. I'm not sure that there was a ton in the Casey Goodson case because there were no body cams.
Right.
But there's a lot of information that needs to go to the other side. There's use of force experts that get retained that need to review all of that evidence, write a report. Those reports need to be exchanged. They need to be evaluated, and then court dates get set. Even given that, I think this is a very long time for a case to be set, really of any magnitude. The judges choose their dockets and their docket timelines. I haven't been involved in those meetings because the Casey Goodson case is not within our office. It's being handled by special prosecutors. So I don't have any insight knowledge of the nature of those conversations. But from looking at what you've seen, knowing that this case happened, the murder happened in December of 2020. That's a long time.
Yeah.
3 years. That's a long time, given what's out there. As the county prosecutor, to be honest with you, I'm not sure there's much that the prosecutor can do because I've been in the shoes, and like I've said, I've objected at every step of the way. There's really not a lot that the prosecutor can do from that standpoint.
So I hear you when you say that, and my issue is always, I understand cops in their position.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you commit a crime and you're being charged with the crime, to me, you should be treated just like the next person.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've seen people go to jail real quick.
Yep.
for murdering someone or for shooting someone.
Absolutely.
I've seen, oh, wow, I can't believe that this person is already in jail for this. And so I think to the community, it feels like when police are involved, this stuff is taking a long time because of the nature of how hard it is to put police officers on trial and how little it actually does happen.
Yeah, and I unfortunately do not have a great answer for that. It happens not only in Franklin County, but in other counties as well, all across the country. And usually what makes matters worse is that the cop is out on bail.
Right.
They're out. They're not being held in a county jail pending trial for 3 years. They're out for 3 years as the case ramps up and gets continued and continued and continued. And I believe the special prosecutors in the Casey Goodson case have been objecting to those continuances as well.
Can you talk to people about in which cases special prosecutors are appointed and sort of like your philosophy on that? Well,
special prosecutors are often appointed when there is either an actual conflict of interest or perceived conflict.
Okay.
And I have seen that there has been a shift in prosecuting cases where we work with that jurisdiction, that it's given to special prosecution. And the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office represents every county agency.
Right.
So we represent the county commissioners, the county engineer, the county treasurer, also the county sheriff. So, and his folks as well on the civil end.
Right.
So with respect to civil suits and collective bargaining and contracts and everything like that. So it would be an actual conflict for us to prosecute him criminally, but also represent the sheriff's office as well. And so that's a situation where a special prosecutor was actually sought after and retained.
Okay.
That happened before my time. I wasn't working there at that time.
Okay.
And we've seen the county prosecutor's office get special counsel with respect to Columbus police officers as well, because we work with Columbus police officers every day. So even if there's not an actual conflict, there's a perception that if this officer isn't convicted, you guys are in on it and you guys had something to do with it. You went easy on them and things like that.
Okay. I have a lot of questions about officer involved shootings and I have this show, but at the end of the day, I'm just a person who lives in the community. I'm not a journalist. I'm not anybody like that, but I definitely have my ear to what is happening in the community.
Yeah.
And I know that people are curious too about, I know that you were the prosecutor on Jayland Walker's case. So for the listeners who don't know, Jayland Walker was shot by a police officer in Akron over...
8 police officers.
8 police officers in Akron. Over 100 shots fired. He was hit, I think, over 40 times. You declined to prosecute. Can you talk about what your reasoning behind that was?
Okay, great. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk about this. It wasn't that I declined to prosecute. It is that I brought the case to the grand jury for prosecution.
Okay.
The grand jury did not indict him.
Okay.
So I can't talk about what happened within the grand jury room because that's against the criminal rules. But I presented that case to the grand jury with another colleague of mine. I do not, as a prosecutor, get a vote for an indictment. We present the case and the grand jurors get to vote for an indictment. And in that case, they chose to not indict him. One of the things I can tell you is that I made sure, along with my co-counsel and the judge involved, that it was not tried before an all-white grand jury as well. So it's not as if we went to Akron, had the fix in, chose an all-white jury for these officers to get off.
Yeah.
We made sure that there were people of color on that jury to hear the case. And they heard the case. We presented the evidence, and the grand jurors chose to not indict that case. And I think it's unfortunate that people have brought that case as the one to latch on to because how do you explain that I'm actually indicted a police officer? I took Adam Coy, I took his case to the grand jury, got an indictment for murder, felt that the charges weren't enough. I took it back to the grand jury and got another indictment for another type of murder so that we could cover all of our bases. We are set for trial in October. When I indicted the case, I was with the Ohio Attorney General's office.
Right.
And then I went to the Franklin County Prosecutor's office. I had a conversation with the Attorney General, and I said, can I take this case with me so that I can continue to prosecute this case because I feel that I'm the best person to prosecute this case because of my experience and my know-how. I've not only that case with Adam Coy, I've prosecuted other police officers as well. I've prosecuted a law enforcement officer in Scioto County for murder. Unfortunately, he was found not guilty. I've indicted and charged other police officers for murder who were found guilty. I've prosecuted probation officers. So I'm not bad. My batting average isn't 100%. I don't get 100% conviction rate, but it's not going to stop me from trying.
What the officers that were found guilty that you mentioned that you prosecuted, what were they found guilty of? Like just...
What were they convicted of? There was an officer who was convicted of assault. There was a probation officer who was convicted of fraud and forgery. I convicted him. I believe that was the charge. There was an officer I tried for murder. He was found not guilty. And there was a deputy in Scioto County. He was found not guilty. And I'm currently have Adam Coy set for trial in October. Those are the 5 law enforcement officers. It's very hard. People should realize, if they don't already, that it's very hard to convict a police officer.
Yeah, no, I think
it's very hard. I was having a conversation with Kim Fox. She is the Cook County District Attorney in Chicago.
Right.
We were at a prosecution conference. Really, it was specialized on how to prosecute police officers out in California a couple of months ago. And she said that Cook County is 0 for 5 during her tenure for prosecuting police officers. And you take Chicago and Cook County, they're a lot more liberal than even Columbus. And they are still 0 for 5 with 0 convictions. But it's not going to keep me from trying to protect our people. It's not going to keep me from trying to protect people who get harmed and assaulted and shot by law enforcement officers. I'm going to keep trying.
Okay. So I think that one of the reasons why the community has questions is because we are drawing this sort of line from your work with Ron O'Brien, who is notorious, I think, in our community for never prosecuting police officers and for being the county prosecutor for a very long time and never doing it. And so I think the question is like, how will you be, I mean, you're a black man, obviously. Yeah. But how will you be different from somebody that you worked under, Ron O'Brien? How will your philosophy be different if this is a person that sort of you came up under in some ways?
Well, I want to be clear. Even though Ron O'Brien hired me, I was not part of his inner circle. Okay. Like he was the boss. I was a new attorney. We didn't go out to lunch. He didn't groom me. He was not my mentor. We didn't have cases together.
So y'all don't really have a relationship outside of you working in his office?
Yeah, I know him. Okay. I know him, but it really ends there. I have worked, and again, the cherry picking kind of gets on me a little bit because people say, yeah, you work for Ron O'Brien, you work for Dave Yost. Okay, but I currently work for Gary Tayak, and I've also worked for Governor Ted Strickland as a Democrat. So if you're going to talk about it, let's talk about it all.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that even with Gary Tayak, I don't know that if you wanted to educate our listeners on the things that have come out of the office that you feel like have been meaningful for the community in material ways in terms of Tayak as prosecutor, like, please do so.
Well, let me answer the question first about essentially my philosophy.
Sure.
You'd have to ask Ron O'Brien about his philosophy, but my philosophy is I want to make sure everyone is held accountable, and whether it's the robbery and shooting that happens in North Linden, or whether it's the corporate person who embezzles $1 million, they need to be held accountable equally. And I'm not afraid to go after police officers or law enforcement officers, even though it's hard to convict them. Yeah. And I believe that's what my record reflects, that I will go after them, that I will continue to go after them. So that's my philosophy, is that I'm going to hold everyone accountable, including law enforcement. There was another question. I missed it.
Listen, I forgot what the question was now, too. I was asking you about Ron O'Brien, asking you about your philosophy. Y'all remember what the question was?
Oh, Gary Tayak. Yes. One of the things
thank you.
One of the things that Gary Tayak did when he came into the administration that I think has been completely overlooked, but I think was great of him to do, is that there was a salary study done of all of the current employees. And it was discovered that there was a disparity between people who were doing the same work but not getting paid equally. And it was a big gender gap in women getting paid equally. And he went basically to the women and said, we're going to make you get paid equally. They didn't even ask for it. So there are people who got approached and said, you're about to get a $10,000 raise, even though you didn't ask for it, just because of the work you do. And we've discovered that there's a difference here. And we need to level you. And I think that was great. And I want to continue that type of recognition of good work and equality across the board. Okay.
So that's like, and I think pay equity is absolutely meaningful as a woman in the workplace. What about like within the community, like the work that is actually touching the community in terms of like cases, not necessarily the internal stuff, which is meaningful?
Yeah. One of the things that we want to make sure we do is that so Gary Tayak took office, COVID happened. Pretty much courts shut down across the board. And now we're kind of waking up, trying to dig ourselves out of what that type of backlog and things like that occurred because of COVID. And he's allowed me to get out into the community, have more community outreach. And again, I just started back here in May of 2023. But I think in this short time, I've been able to reach different groups, to do different initiatives and things like that.
Yeah.
One of the initiatives that I did was essentially bond equity.
Okay.
That I started, along with, I talked about the pleas and the sentencing recommendations.
Right.
I developed guidelines for bond recommendations to the court. Again, just so implicit bias wouldn't creep in, and you look at a guy who, I don't know, maybe looks homeless, maybe looks disheveled, and we ask for a high bond. But if he's clean cut and looks a little bit different, then maybe we ask for a low bond. I don't think that's right. We need to be looking at the specific reason for why they are here and base that on our bond amounts.
Yeah.
And so he's allowed me to implement those sorts of things.
So how do you feel about bail reform? I hear that you've sort of done bail or bond reform within your office, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think if it works, we should absolutely use it.
Okay.
And I think it's very interesting that Illinois has passed legislation that has made some significant strides in bail reform. And I really want to see how that develops and plays out. I think it really only went into effect back in, it's like November or something like that. So I want to see how the summer goes, because that's really a hot time for arrests and crime and things like that, especially in Chicago. And I'd be willing to latch onto it if it is found to be effective.
Yeah, because that's always like my thoughts when I think about bond or bail. Is I know, for instance, because I've done my research, that I think you want to do a minimum $400K bond for violent gun offenders.
Yes.
So I understand that, right? That's scary to the community that there may be a violent offender out there with a gun.
Yes.
But when I think about equity too, what always creeps into the justice system is that some folks will have the money to pay, and some folks won't. And so a bond that high, talk about your philosophy on that. Is that obviously it's so the person won't be on the streets? Yes.
I think it's important that people, whether you have a lot of money or whether you don't have money, that money speaks to people, right? So I think the important thing is to make sure people appear for court, and they don't commit new crimes. So those are I think two of the most important things out there that we should be looking at. It's actually a constitutional requirement, public safety, when a judge is to give bond. So I understand that there is, $400,000 to me may mean something different than $400,000 to someone else.
Right.
And I recognize that's out there, but I also recognize that we should not be having people on the streets who are repeat violent offenders. And so I can't develop a policy where I say no bond for you, no bond for anybody who has done this. So I essentially have to pick a number, and that's the number that we landed on based on our research and our gathering of the data.
What would you? So I guess my question would be: would you support something that feels like common sense bail reform to increase equity around who stays in jail and who doesn't? Because we know that, when folks are arrested and they have a bond that they can't afford to pay, it trickles down into so many different areas of their life. If you can't go to work, or you can't, and we know most people are not violent offenders.
Yes.
So would you support something like that?
I absolutely would. I absolutely would. I just want to make sure that the violent, dangerous offenders are held, because we all know they're coming back to our community when they go and commit more violence. So I want to make sure my number one priority as county prosecutors to keep the community safe. So yes, I would certainly want to make sure that there's equity and equality in the system, and we're not keeping one group of people held while another group of people gets let loose.
Yeah. I know that you said you worked in the juvenile division.
Yes.
What is your thoughts and philosophy on like restorative justice, particularly for juvenile offenders? I'm sure that I'm not going to answer the question for you, but I'm sure it depends on what they've done.
Yeah.
But I think that, as a person, as a citizen, as a mother, I see so many of these kids who don't necessarily have a chance once they are, institutionalized.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts on that?
So I could do a whole podcast on this alone.
Okay.
So
maybe we'll have you back.
So when I was I left the county prosecutor's office and was hired as chief counsel under Governor Strickland for the Department of Youth Services. And I managed a legal team there to handle class action lawsuits. And one of the first things that I did after I went through the initial training was that they wanted to take me to all of the institutions. Just like, go inside, you need to be inside, see how it's operating. So I went to, I believe it was the Cuyahoga Hills facility. And I go up there, I'm with the director, the assistant director, myself, and I think another executive. We go there, it's like an hour and a half drive. I got coffee, I've drank coffee, so I gotta go to the bathroom. So I go to the bathroom, I'm the only one in the bathroom, and I hear the door open, and I see out of my peripheral vision that someone comes in and walks behind me, right? I'm like, okay. And but they're not like using the bathroom or washing their hands, so I'm like, okay, this is weird. So I finish what I'm doing, and I turn around and I recognize it's a juvenile.
Okay.
Who's looking at me, and I recognize him. He is actually a kid that I had sent to juvenile prison. I had convicted him of attempted murder. It was probably like a year prior. He went by the street name of Murder. Okay. And he's standing there looking at me. I'm looking at him. I'm like, oh wow, my first day at DYS, and I'm about to get in a fight in a bathroom. Like, this kid and me I guess we're about to fight because he's looking at me and I'm looking at him, and what does he want?
Yeah.
He recognized me as the guy who prosecuted him, and the judge sent him to DYS. So he says, do you recognize me? I look at him, I go, yeah. He goes, how are you? I go, I'm good. How are you? I'm still tense, like, okay, when's he going to hit me? And he says, I'm doing great. I got my GED. I'm on the the lowest security level. So I get to work in the front office with, I can't remember the superintendent's name, but he named her. So I'm up here in the front office. I get to walk around. I get out of here in like 6 months. Things are going great. And he's like, I saw you coming in here, and I just wanted to say hi and let you know how I'm doing. I was like, holy cow. That's fantastic. And like throughout the entire day, the tour and meeting everyone, I could not get that out of my mind. Like this kid who I thought was a terrible criminal. He had shot a guy 13 times. I think I was trying to get him bound over to the adult system, and he wasn't. And I was like, wow, this is fantastic. This like made my week, made my year, that this kid has his eye on the future and he has rehabilitated. So when I went back to the prosecutor's office, I had that different mindset that no one should be thrown away.
Right.
People, every day, there's someone who hits rock bottom, who is either doing a terrible thing to someone else or doing a terrible thing to themselves with drugs or things like that, who decides, enough is enough. I need to go up now. I need to make my way back. And they start that journey. Sometimes they go down some notches, but they want to start that journey. So I certainly feel that we should not give up on the young people. A lot of them are a product of their environment, which is very sad. Mm-hmm. And we need to do a as good of job as we can to, yes, we do have to protect our society. We do have to protect our community, but we can't turn our back on them.
Yeah.
And I think by the time they get to the criminal justice system, we're kind of reactionary from that standpoint, but there's a lot of work to be done before they get there.
Is there anything that your office is involved in or like could be involved in to sort of like stop that pipeline before they actually get to the criminal justice system? Or are there things that you try to do in your office with mm-hmm. guardians, parents, other folks in the lives of these children to sort of intervene before? Because my concern is always, once you're institutionalized, I mean, the likelihood is lower that you'll, be able to come out. I don't necessarily believe that. I think that jail rehabilitates people in the mm-hmm. ways that are necessarily pushed. And so what is your office involved in or wanting to be involved in that can we have a pretty extensive
diversion program for first-time offenders, which mm-hmm. is I think it's great, because I know when I was a juvenile, I did a lot of stupid stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think any of it I was actually hurting people, but it was stupid stuff.
Yeah.
That some of it was against the law. And
don't talk about any of that on here.
So I think it's important that we recognize that young people make mistakes, as long as it's not a violent mistake. But even then, we should have some sort of understanding and have that be the backdrop of where we start. But our office has a lot of good diversion programs, like I said. We work with Children's Services a lot to try and ensure that individuals who come from broken homes don't return to them, to make sure that services are in place, to make sure that home is restored before the youth is returned to them, and things like that. Mm-hmm. But I certainly want to be mindful that we have to keep our community safe, but we also need to, and this is like a mantra of mine, we need to punish the crime and not the individual. And that's juveniles and adults. We need to punish the crime and not the individual. I have people in my family who have committed crimes, who have robbed banks, and some of my favorite relatives who are, they did it in the 70s before I was born, went to prison, did their time, and are now doing great things for the community. And I never would have guessed that they have done something like that. So I think there are a lot of families out there with those type of stories. And I just want to make sure our office knows that and prosecutes that accordingly, because you could get some prosecutors who are very, I hate this guy, I'm going to make sure he pays for everything, going to bury him under the jail. And, there are some heinous, scary criminals out there, I'm not going to lie, in the things that I've seen. But there are also some individuals who have committed crimes out of necessity. They need to eat. They are feeding a drug habit. They need to buy food for their family and things like that. And so we need to prosecute the crime and not the person. So
when I'm thinking about, our greater community and I know that, your job is to keep the community safe in whatever capacity you have the control of doing. So I have to ask you this too.
Okay.
The question swirling about your address. There's an article in the Dispatch that says you live in Delaware. For real. Like, you have an address in Columbus, but you really live in Delaware. Your family lives in Delaware. Do you live in Delaware?
No.
Okay.
So since I've moved to Columbus in 1999, I've either worked in Franklin County, lived in Franklin County, or worked and lived in Franklin County. Currently, I work and live in Franklin County, and I've been doing that for quite some time.
Okay. I think the question that folks have is, your address was registered in October 2022, And so folks are like, and not just folks, me included, want to know. Did you register your address to run for this office? And do you really like, I know you work in Columbus and you went to college in Columbus. You've been in Columbus a long time.
Yep.
But Delaware is very different.
Absolutely.
Than Columbus. For my friends that live in Delaware, they don't ever have to come to Columbus because they've got everything that they would ever want or need in Delaware. And so I think for me, I believe that the best solutions for community are with people who are most proximate to that community. And so I kind of just want to like clear the question up, clear the air here. Like what was up with that piece, the whole address registration and all of that?
Well, I live in Franklin County and I've been doing so for quite some time. So I don't want to get into personal aspects or things like that. I don't think that's what's going to keep the community safe. So I live in Franklin County.
Yeah.
The Board of Elections recognizes me as living in Franklin County. And like I said, I've been living and or working in Franklin County since 1999. So my commitment is to the community here, and it really always has been.
Can you understand why people might be on you about that question, though, given like the problems that Columbus is a great city, so I don't want to start with that, but it's issues in Columbus. And so
absolutely,
when your opponents, I believe, are one of them lives very close to me. I see her walking her dogs. So that, can you understand why people might have that question and be really stuck on wanting to know the answer to that question?
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's as much as I'm gonna get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my last question for you is this: why do you feel like you're the best person for this job?
Because I am currently the only prosecutor out of the three people. Well, actually, out of the four candidates, the two other Democratic candidates and the Republican candidate, I'm the only prosecutor. I'm a career prosecutor. I'm not a politician. I've been prosecuting since 2003, and that's my passion. That's what I've done. My track record shows it. I've prosecuted a lot of cases that deal with victims from our community. And I'm dedicated to making our community safe, not only for me, but really for our children. I've got 4 kids. I want to make sure that when my son says he's going to this restaurant or taking his girlfriend somewhere, that I can have a sense of feeling that I am doing everything I can to keep our community safe, to protect my son, to protect my daughters from violent crime that's out there. But also with that, hold police officers accountable as well. My son got a speeding ticket a couple of months ago, and he called me and he was like, "Dad, I got a speeding ticket and you're going to be mad." I was like, "Yeah, I am. Because you're 17, I've been telling you to drive too fast." He said, "But you're going to be proud of me though, because the cop pulled me over. I kept my hands on the wheel like he told me to. I didn't reach for my wallet. I told him it was in my pocket and asked him if he wanted me to get it or if he wanted to get it himself. I told him my license and registration was in the glove compartment. I didn't reach for it." And I was like, wow, I was relieved and happy, because I am nervous that he may get pulled over and he's going to get shot by a cop. And even though I'm proud that he did that, it is very, very sad to me that he has to do that.
Right.
That we have to teach our kids that, not only my son, but our daughters too. That, you got to watch out for the gangbangers. You got to watch out for the dope boys. You got to watch out for the shooters. But you also got to watch out for the cops too. And that hurts. And we shouldn't have to live in a community that has to deal with all of those issues. Growing up as a young black kid is hard enough.
Yeah.
So
it's rough.
It is. It is. Dealing with COVID and everything else.
Yeah.
So I feel that I am the best person to help take us to the next level.
Yeah.
Here in Franklin County.
It's been much made about this being a historic race because it's there are 4 candidates, but there's 3 candidates who are Black people, 2 are women. Again, you're a Black man.
Yeah.
But one of my favorite things to say is all skin folk ain't kin folk. So why should we trust you?
Yeah, I'm actually not running for this spot because I'd be the first Black county prosecutor. That doesn't really factor into my equation. I can be a Black first doing something else.
Yeah.
I'm doing this job for me and my children and my family and your children and your family, so that our community can be safe. And I am the best person to do that because I have a track record of doing that. I have a track record of holding people accountable. I have a track record of taking guns off the street. But I also have a track record of going after people that law enforcement officers sometimes don't go after, such as police officers, such as probation officers. I've investigated judges. I want to make sure that if it's a crime for me to do it, then it's a crime for you to do it. Yeah. And you should be held accountable just like I would be held accountable. I'm tired of seeing a system where that's not always the case. And under my administration, I would make sure that all law enforcement officers, including the various police departments and law enforcement agencies that we work with, know that they better investigate things or there's really going to be hell to pay. I'm going to make a stink of it. It's going to be a problem. And I have the know-how to do that because I've been doing it for so long. I know how these agencies do things. I know how. 'Cause
there's 30-something agencies that you're going to have
38 law enforcement. Yes,
into
38 law enforcement agencies that would potentially send us criminal cases.
Okay.
Exactly.
So that's a much bigger sort of load than what you have right now, but you feel like with your tenure, with your years of experience, that you're the man for the job.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because I talked to, and I've said this at the forums, that the other Democrat candidates, they have very progressive ideas, but it's really just ideas unless you have the institutional know-how to get it done. And I've got that institutional know-how to get it done.
Okay. Well, I am really grateful for you having come on our show.
Appreciate it.
Is there anything else that you would want people to know about you or about your candidacy?
I guess that the 2 things that I keep going back to and things that I think about every day is that I want to make sure that people are held accountable for the crimes they commit, whoever they are, whether it's a Statehouse person who is committing some sort of bribery or fraud, or whether it's a police officer, or whether it's a gang member shooting up the streets in the Short North. I want to make sure everyone's held accountable for the crimes that they commit. And also I want to make sure we prosecute the crime and not the individual. If you step out of line and do something that's illegal, you should be held accountable for it. But it also doesn't mean that we need to take away your livelihood forever. Mm-hmm. And I've seen systems that usually operate on either end of the spectrum. Really tough on crime. You step out of line, you're going to get punished and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And also, we've seen very liberal jurisdictions like San Francisco where there's a lot of crime that's happening and people aren't getting prosecuted for it that should actually be held accountable, and that's leading to worse crimes. I think there's a happy median where we can protect the community, prosecute the people that need to be prosecuted, and rehabilitate the people that need to be rehabilitated.
Okay.
So I appreciate you having me on. This has been very good.
Absolutely. And how can people learn more about you? Do you have Instagram? Do you have a website?
Yes.
TikTok? Are you on TikTok?
I'm not on TikTok. You can go to pearsonforprosecutor.com. That's my website. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram as well.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.